Hi, my name's Rosie and I'm an HBDI Master Practitioner. Today I'm going to walk you through an understanding of the HBDI Team Profile. As a certified practitioner, you have access to the HBDI Team Profile, which can provide additional insights and data to support you in the application of whole brain thinking with teams. Before we begin, I'm going to provide some background information on the case study we are going to look at. The example team is a global insurance company, and they're a successful and experienced team who are well established and regarded as safe, reliable, and conservative in their approach to business. It's a time when the government deregulated the insurance industry within Australia, and banks could now sell insurance, meaning that for the first time this organisation had some significant competition. Based on that information, we can reflect on some of the following questions. What predictions do we make about the HBDI team profile based on that data? And thinking about the issues the team were facing, in which quadrant would you place each of these issues? So some of the issues were increased competition in the marketplace because banks are now selling insurance, falling market share because customers are moving to the banks for their insurance needs, high staff turnover and low morale because the banks are poaching staff, and lack of innovation in dealing with this changing context, meaning the bank's now selling insurance products. So let's have a look at the sample profile. Here we can see the team profile composite page, which has a summary of each individual's profile superimposed or overlaid on top of each other. The context is important so we can make some information or make some interpretations of this data. On this page, what we are looking at is analysing the range within each quadrant, that is the highest quadrant score compared to the lowest quadrant score. We can look at range and interpret a high range to mean lots of points of view or lots of differences in thinking within that quadrant. Conversely, a low range could suggest groupthink or similar thinking within that quadrant. We can identify spikes within quadrants, and on this map we can see spikes in both the yellow quadrant as well as the blue quadrant and the green quadrant. And we can also identify clumping. So where the profiles tend to clump suggests that there may be a group thinking in that degree of preference. So in the yellow quadrant, there is a clumping, a visual clumping in the secondary preference area of the D quadrant, suggesting that on average, perhaps the D quadrant is a secondary preference for this group rather than overall a preference area. Here we can see the average of the team. So we can see this reported in normal conditions and under pressure, as well as the mode scores being reported. What we can analyse here is that overall this team provides a 1122 preference code. We can see that by looking at the scores and designating it to a preference code. We can reflect that this team has a higher left mode tilt than a right mode tilt, and that the upper versus lower modes are fairly even. We can recognise that there is not much of a shift under pressure in this example. And we can also think about, from each individual's perspective, if you were to superimpose your profile on top of this team average, how aligned or non-aligned are you to the average of that team? Be careful that averages can be misleading. For example, we know we have 3 spikes in the yellow quadrant, so that stronger yellow quadrant preference on average is impacted by those high thinking preferences, those couple of high thinking preferences in the yellow. It's possible that on average the yellow is manifested less significantly in this team. Let's look at the rank order of preferences now. So here we can see the sorting of quadrants from most to least preferred. It can reflect the direction of thought or the process through which a team operates when undertaking a project. A gap between quadrants of 20 or more points could be hard to jump, or a quadrant that is hard to access. So moving from the A quadrant to the D quadrant, we're looking for evidence that that shift is actually happening and that they are focusing on that D quadrant and then subsequently the C quadrant. When looking at this page, you could also compare your personal flow versus the team flow of preferences. And if there are quadrants that perhaps are overlooked, You could create internal team watchdogs, for example, someone to keep us accountable in the C quadrant or someone to keep us accountable in the D quadrant, as long as the average of the team doesn't override that and perhaps overlook that moving forward. Here we can look at the flow of preferences from most to least preferred quadrant in terms of profile scores and under pressure. Here the data is reported as percentages, so we can see 31% of the team's energy is focused in the B quadrant, followed by 30% in the A quadrant, 22% in the D quadrant, and then 18% in the C quadrant. If you look at the under pressure data, you will notice not a huge dissimilarity between the process is the same and the percentages are fairly similar, so it may be difficult to identify when this team is under pressure or not under pressure. We also might want to think about the task the team is undertaking and how that task may manifest or not manifest in terms of its preferences, and reflect on whether the team is under pressure. In the example we spoke about, we know the context is one of change, changing work environment, changing climate, deregulating of insurance, and so that yellow quadrant is one that is quite focused. So it will be interesting to think about the team's reaction and reflection on that D quadrant. Here we have the profile results and the list of scores for each member of the team. What we can see here in numeric form is the highest quadrant score highlighted, and the order is usually blue, green, red, then yellow. So we can see a number of people's highest quadrant score falls within the blue quadrant, a number of people's also falls within the green quadrant. No one in the team's highest quadrant score falls into the red quadrant, and 2 individuals have their highest quadrant score in the D quadrant. We can also look at the introverted-extrovert scale, which is self-reported data, and this could indicate the way each of these quadrants may be manifested or expressed within the team. We can look at this data to analyse who brings what, the range of thinking within a quadrant. Remember, a large range could suggest lots of points of view, a low range could suggest perhaps groupthink. We could look for strong preference codes of scores of 100 or more, and any blind spots. For example, in this team, the red quadrant may be a blind spot with no individual drawing on that thinking as a primary or first quadrant. In fact, only one team member in this group has a preference code of a 1 for the red quadrant. Here we have the group preference map, which is our average placement considering all our quadrants combined. We also have the introvert-extrovert scale shaded on the map. The average of the team is where the white X is indicated, so X marks the spot. On average, the team's placement is more in the left mode. Here we can look at overall dispersion of individuals within the team. We can look at cliques within the team and outliers in the team, as well as individual differences. So we could perhaps reflect on how profile 13 appears to be somewhat of an outlier, and so explore what their experience is in the team versus other profiles within the team. To give you an insight on who's who, profile 8 is the CEO and he is new to the team, and profile 9 was the acting CEO, currently the CFO. So we can see how that dynamic may play out in terms of the team working together. Here we have the preference map under normal conditions and the preference map under pressure. We can see shifts here, and visually we can see these shifts under pressure. I would often talk about the fox in the henhouse analogy, and what that means is with the under pressure or adjective pair data, if you're putting a fox in the henhouse, you're creating pressure, and there is often a visual dispersion of profiles away or to the outer rims of the model. And we can see that here in profiles 3 and 4 moving further into the red. We can see profile 8 moving further into the yellow and the red, profile 9 moving further into the blue and the green. In this map, we can also see perhaps potential cliques with profiles 9, 11, 5 and 2 clustering together, which may provide a group think, or those 4 people coming together to think in a similar way around an issue under pressure. Here we have the work elements distributed by quadrant, so each of the 16 work elements, each of those bar graphs represents one person within the team and the rate at which they endorse that particular word. 5 indicates a higher preference, 1 indicates a lower preference. This could suggest what may be a priority in the team, as well as how the elements are distributed. If we use creative in the yellow as an example, we can see a very vast distribution in the individuals in this team who are providing a focus and having a preference for that particular work element versus those who are not. And so that could be interesting to explore how that manifests within this team. That data is then synthesized onto this page, looking at the rank order of work elements on average, the most selected work element to the least selected. Any element that is under the average of 3 could be an area which may be overlooked by the team. So, for example, teaching, training, innovating, creative, administrative tasks, writing tasks. How is the team focusing on these particular work elements when less than the average choose as a preference to focus on these tasks? Do remember that preference does not always equal competence, so it may be possible the team is operating outside their preference, but it would also be interesting to consider the different tasks the team undertakes and how aligned this rank order is to the task they are undertaking. In this context of this team, the task is about dealing with change, conceptualizing, innovating, and responding to a changing climate. So their preferences suggest they're going to have a problem-solving financial implementation approach, whereas they may be requiring more of an innovating, creative, conceptualizing approach to this particular issue. Here we have the key descriptors reported, so the selections to the words we chose to describe the way we see ourselves. The black portion is the words selected as most descriptive, and we can see the percentages indicated there. This helps us recognize the clusters within quadrants that the team may focus on. We can compare this to our work elements as well as our function, and we can also see how the team could be perceived by others when we look at this data. There is only one key descriptor that is never selected by this group, which is artistic. The rest of the time, these elements are manifested or a preference within each of the quadrants. So the clusters here could be quite interesting, where initially we did not see much red preference come out. Here we can see that in key descriptors, words such as emotional and intuitive are preferred by a number of the team members. This data is synthesized into this page, the key descriptors on average, using percentages from most preferred key descriptor to least preferred key descriptor and sorted by coloured quadrant. We can see those selected by the majority of the team are those with choices of 50% or more. And we can also think about what could be overlooked within this team. Again, this gives us a nice indication of how the team may appear. If I'm coming in to facilitate this team, to me they're probably going to appear as rational, analytical, logical, controlled, and factual thinkers. You can compare the top 5 to the bottom 5 and perhaps pose to the team, how does this team engage thinkers who maybe chosen some of those lower preferences in their order of hierarchy, such as how do they engage with an artistic, symbolic, musical, spatial, simultaneous, spiritual type of thinker. Here we have the adjective pairs comparison. So when provided 2 options, what percentage of individuals chose one of those words versus the other? We can see in the first example, 100% of the team chose creative over spiritual when they had the choice. When we get further down to the bottom of this report page, we see elements where there is more of a 50-50 choice. So we could look at the likes, thinks, technical, 48% versus people orientated, 54%. So there's more of a 50-50 split there, and what that could mean in terms of areas of synergy, areas of friction within the team. Again, this page will become quite important when the team considers itself under pressure, or when under pressure contexts are manifesting, and this could be quite insightful data for the team. Here we have the participant responses to the 20 questions reported as a percentage. So what we're looking at here is the distribution of responses to these questions. If we take question 2 as an example, Daydreaming has provided the impetus for the solutions of many of my more important problems. We can see 7% within the team agree with that statement, 15% are neutral, 38% disagree, and 38% strongly disagree. So this could give us an indication of some of the values held by the team and how these may manifest in the way the team is working together and operating within their given context. Some facts to summarize the team profile. Individuals have received a debrief individually or as a group prior to this report being discussed. What that means is you need to understand your own personal HBDI profile before you can get into reviewing the HBDI team profile. The report is generated for the team for the purpose of improving team effectiveness. It is very important to consider that individuals are represented anonymously and in random to avoid inappropriate inferences. There is a key provided to the certified practitioner so you can understand who is who, but in terms of your team, you need to report that anonymously unless consent is provided to share who's who, and that would be 100% consent provided to share. Certified practitioners will not share the report with others unless consent is provided. So that means sharing it with a manager who may not be involved in the report. You can only do that if consent is provided by the team. Also, this team report needs to be debriefed and then disseminated by a certified practitioner. It is not the type of report that is going to tell you if this is the best working team or not the best working team. It is a facilitated report and a discussion document. There is a resource chapter called Debriefing the HBDI Team Profile, which will help you in preparing and understanding this report when working with teams in the future.